I am Jim Collison, and live from our Gallup studios, kind of around the world today. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on August 24th, 2021. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room. There's just a link right above me there to get that done. Sign in and let us know your questions live. If you're listening after the fact, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or there on YouTube. That way you never miss an episode. Keb Castleberry is our host today. He worked as a market leader with Gallup, and that's a fancy title. Keb, welcome to your first Call to Coach. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Jim. I tell you what, I am pretty excited about being here, so thanks for letting us do this.
Yeah, good to have you. We've got some fantastic guests, so let's not waste any more time. Why don't we get them introduced?
That sounds great. Again, thanks so much, everybody, for joining our Call to Coach session today with PTC Therapeutics. I tell you what, I am pretty beyond delighted to be joined by our friends and partners, Noam, Farago, as well as Martin Rexroad. So, Martin, Noam, we're going to have a lot of questions for you. We're going to cover a lot of bases today, but I think let's jump into the first. Before we jump into the partnership, I would say let's start with both of you maybe sharing your top five and a quick background of yourself as well as your roles at PTC. Martin, you want to jump into that first?
Sure. So first off, thanks for having us here. We're delighted to be here, and we really value and appreciate our partnership with Gallup. So I've been at PTC. It'll be 8 years next month. The company's 23 years old, went 16 and a half years before its first approval. Founded by Stuart Peltz, a medical school professor nearby at Rutgers University. My top five are achiever, responsibility, restorative, ideation, and strategic. I always like to go below those five and also highlight belief, woo, and connectedness are in my top 10. And I was for my first 7 years here, the head of HR, and almost a year ago moved over into the chief culture and community officer role, and have had the pleasure of working with Gallup for almost 4 years.
Perfect. Noam, how about you?
Great. Thanks again. Great to be here. My top five are individualization, maximizer, arranger, context, and communication. I'm currently the head of talent management and organizational development at PTC Therapeutics. I've been here for about 2 years. And in terms of talent management and OD, what I do is I'm responsible for different development initiatives, both for employees as well as for leaders in the organization, as well as a variety of organizational processes that drive global consistency, process improvement, and employee engagement. I'm a certified HBDI facilitator and a Gallup strength coach. And I use CliftonStrengths across all the different processes that we are involved in. In terms of my career, before joining PTC, I did roles both in organizational development and HR in a variety of companies and industries.
That's fantastic, Noam. And I think I will share my top five. I am competition, achiever, strategic, restorative, and woo. Again, I've been here for 5 years, and I'm a market leader for the New York and New Jersey market there. So, Martin, we've had a lot of conversations in the past, and I don't think there's anybody better that can explain a little bit of PTC's history. And let's go a little bit into the mission and purpose of PTC. I think it's going to be really valuable for our audience to really know the background of PTC. Would you be able to share that with us?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, PTC founded 23 and a half years ago by a medical school professor who was trying to leverage science to create new drugs for patients with rare disease. And so embedded, and we still have our founder. So very few biotechs survive 23 years, almost none do so, prosper, and hang on to their purpose, grow, become a commercially successful organization. But the purpose has really been important to us throughout, and it's always been a company that's valued its relationships, and we didn't understand this terminology until we met you. But we always have worked to have people be able to do their best at work every day.
Love that. It's a great mission and purpose. I'll tell you what, we are truly honored to be partnering with you for so long. So I think what might be a next step here is let's jump into the first time when we first partnered with you. I think let's go back, Martin, to 2017, if you remember that. And let's jump into what sparked your interest really in employee engagement. What was some of maybe the challenges that you were facing there at PTC back in 2017, where there was a bit of an interest to partner with an employee engagement vendor?
Yeah, so Jim, maybe we could pull up the first slide and this kind of builds. So I'll tell you as you go along. So this is a picture of our workforce at PTC going back to 2007. And if you click, Jim, the first click, you can see that in 2013, in June of 2013, PTC went public 15 years after being founded. That's 15 years of challenges. You can see a fairly small research company. We got our first European Union drug approval August of 2014. If you click again, we got our first approved drug in the US. And then if you click on the next one, you can see Martin and Noam and others started calling Gallup. So what's important to point out is that when I joined, there were 135 people in 2 buildings here in New Jersey. And I remember telling people that I did not believe that you needed to do surveys when you had 135 people. If you can't keep your finger on the pulse when your organization's that small, and by meeting, and our CEO is a master of having breakfasts and teas and lunches and kind of roundtable sessions to really kind of keep the finger on the pulse. But if you go back, you can see that we anticipated growth and we guessed right. So you can see in the upper left that in an 8-year period, we grew 9-fold. We grew from 2 labs near Rutgers University to 25 countries now with 5 approved drugs. And thanks to the partnership with Gallup, engagements increased over those 4 years. And Kev, really to answer the question directly, we always felt like we were keeping our finger on the pulse of engagement. But at the time we called you, we had already started a commercial organization in Europe and in Latin America. We've always valued benchmarks. One of the things that we value so much in this partnership with Gallup is to be a drug discovery company. You have to be incredibly good with empirical data. You got to be incredibly good with statistics, and you have to know what to do with them. And so if one of our core competencies is all this empirical data work that we do to discover and get drugs approved, you all provided us the empirical evidence and data that we needed, and insights and suggestions and tools. And so the partnership is really matched up, if you will, around core competencies that the Gallup and PTC both have.
That's fantastic. And, when we think about using the Q12, it's been around for a while. We do have a pretty large database, but also I think what's really important about the Q12, it's very actionable and driven at that local level of management. I just think that PTC has done a remarkable job, and we'll kind of delve into the impact of those results down the line in this conversation. But let's fast forward a bit and let's talk about 2020. I think 2020 for many organizations, many people personally and professionally were pretty challenging. One thing that struck me about PTC is you continued to focus heavily on learning opportunities for your employees. So Martin, we met in person end of 2019, I believe, and our good friend Mike McDonald and myself brought you It's the Manager book. If you remember that, I'd love to hear a bit of your takeaways from that book.
Okay, so I'm obviously a big fan of Gallup. So what I would tell my friends that are listening is about every 2 years, just get their book and read it. This is, if you haven't read this one, go ahead and get this one and read it. So we were reviewing our Q12 results. Mike and Keb and I were meeting right outside our CEO's office, and they presented me a book. I'm a learner. That's one of my top 10. So they knew I'd read it. So they knew their money was well spent. And on the back of this book, if you don't have it, these changing demands of the workforce. I read this and it was like, that's it. That's it. I used this in global presentations that year, and all these trends are spot on. And quite honestly, we looked at that. We looked at strengths. We looked at from boss to coach. The book is written so you can read it quickly and get great insights. The data's there. And again, the next book on my shelf is that there were, in the future trying to sort through as Wellbeing at Work. But that book had a huge impact, and it really highlighted that you had a good handle on the future trends. And if we just paid attention, if we just listened, if we just reviewed the data and think about some of the tools and resources you were providing, we'd be okay. And I think that's where we've headed.
I'd love to hear that. And Noam, this going to be for you because I think about a year ago we planned on a weekly conversation, and about every week for a year, you and I and your colleague Jessica Moore have been meeting and discussing on a quick check-in, 30 minutes, and it's been quite a pleasure. But we've discussed a lot about CliftonStrengths, and let's jump into that a little bit. Now, I think one remarkable thing, and I know you're going to share this a little bit, but 98% last year, in a very challenging time, of your employees completed CliftonStrengths. Let's talk a bit more about maybe Martin and Noam, some of the challenges that you were trying to alleviate when you introduced CliftonStrengths. What were your goals maybe around becoming a strengths-based organization there?
And I think that Martin really touched upon it before, but the growth of the organization, I think many organizations that are growing in such a fast pace, they have the question of how do we look at our culture, and how are we proactively managing our culture and making sure our culture is moving in the right direction. And I think for PTC, the combination of that question and the answer provided by CliftonStrengths and by the philosophy and methodology behind it were key in terms of how we want to define our culture. We really want to be a strengths-based culture. And I think we did a few things even before 2020 to make that happen. First of all, the development of the PTC expectations. So really have a clear set of expectations for every employee at PTC. And it's something that was done from the executive committee and all the way down to the leaders, and then cascaded down to the organization. We have the establishment of the culture and community function, and Martin as a leader, and there couldn't be anybody else that's better in that specific position. And then last but definitely not least, the introduction of CliftonStrengths across the organization, and really having that message out there that this is who we are. This is the way we want to work together in terms of seeing the strengths and seeing the areas that each one of us can bring to the team, rather than focusing on the weaknesses and what do we need to fix about each other. So I think in that sense, that is one big element that really was a driver in terms of helping us incorporate and roll out CliftonStrengths across the organization. Martin, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so Jim and Kev, nobody else is ever going to answer a CliftonStrengths question using organic chemistry. So I'm going to be your first, right? So if you think about what we do, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a setup, because I think part of this partnership, a part of the power of what's going on here is that some of what we're talking about with CliftonStrengths just naturally works with what we do as a company. If you think about it, when we develop, we're both a small molecule and a gene therapy company. In small molecules, you create a molecule And there's a moment where organic chemists are trying to make the molecule either stronger or less toxic, or both, right? And they have the ability to look at the periodic table, and they pick an atom. They say, I'm going to use a nitrogen atom to reduce the toxicity of a molecule. If you're on Jeopardy and they ask what's a molecule you can use to reduce that, it's nitrogen. Just trust me. They look at the periodic table. They say, I need that molecule to make this, that atom to make this molecule better. And they have a way of, when you think about a team like a molecule, when you think about having a new functionality of a team, it's a strength you're looking for, right? And so our mindset so we're led by molecular biologists. I mean, the notion of trying to discover strengths and assembling strengths in a certain pattern in a team, in an organization, it fits our core scientific purpose. So that really resonated with many of our leaders. And again, nobody's ever going to compare CliftonStrengths to, building a molecule. But when you hear it that way, you can see it just made sense to us.
I love that. And we don't this one award that you were a recent recipient of this year, the Don Clifton Strengths Based Culture Award. I mean, that is phenomenal that you were able to receive that award, but also you were able to receive that enthusiasm and excitement around Clifton Strengths. And Noam, what was the communication like initially when you began introducing Clifton Strengths to your organization, and how did that rollout take place?
Yeah, and maybe we can show a slide that we have about kind of the rollout. So first of all, I think a great way to start was really focusing on our EC, which is the executive committee. So again, our CEO and his direct reports, they did the Clifton Strengths, and they started on the boss to coach journey. And I think that was key, leadership sponsorship, and specifically the CEO sponsorship. And Stu is a big believer in Gallup and CliftonStrengths. So his excitement about it really led to the next step, which was now rolling it out to the direct reports. So again, all of the direct reports for the EC, they also had the CliftonStrengths and boss to coach. And then finally, the idea was, how about we roll this out to the whole organization? Have all of the organization take CliftonStrengths and take the Discover Unique Strengths half-day session. And that's a big commitment. And I think a big part of making that happen was, first of all, as I mentioned, the leadership sponsorship. Stu did a few great videos about why he believes this is important. And he spoke very candidly about his experience with CliftonStrengths, his view about CliftonStrengths, and also he shared his report, which I thought was great. So in addition to that, of course, there's a lot of work in the backside, following up, making sure everything moves. And I think I'll just mention Jessica Moore, who was instrumental in making this happen and following up with people and making sure we really reach those numbers. But again, an amazing achievement in terms of 98% of the employees in the organization completing the CliftonStrengths assessment. And then in addition to that, having 85% of them also attend the Discovery or Unique Strengths sessions. And that was just the beginning. So after we did this for all of the employees, including our executive committee and their direct reports, we also wanted to provide the managers some more help there. So first of all, the feedback we got about the Discover Unique Strengths session was phenomenal as well. Great feedback there. But then also in terms of the managers, we did 2 sessions. And again, this is in 2020, where everybody is trying to kind of figure out what's happening. And I think that actually helped us in a way, because it allowed people to focus on their development in a way that's a bit different than usual. So we had additional 2 half-day sessions specifically for managers. One was leading with strengths, really understanding their own strengths as leaders, as well as how can they leverage the strengths of their team members in order to help them on their professional and personal development. And then the second one was the conversation, 5 conversations that drive performance. So we had those rolled out for all the managers in the organization. And again, great participation. I think we had, about 90% of managers joined the sessions. And again, great feedback on both of those. So I would say, just to kind of sum it up, leadership sponsorship, as well as a lot of hard work in the background to make this happen. But the feedback has been phenomenal from employees and managers alike.
That's amazing. And if everybody's not familiar necessarily with the Boss to Coach journey, but the 3 areas that we really like to focus on here at Gallup are strengths-based leadership, engagement-focused, as well as performance-oriented type of a leadership learning path. And in my opinion, PTC has really been world-class in terms of delivering that and really believing in that. And you can kind of see the numbers and how their employees really jumped in and owned this type of progress. And we really appreciate that. With this next phase, Noam, this one's a bit more to you. You just finished your certification. You became a certified coach. This is in addition to 30 of those half-day sessions that all employees participated in. And that's really those foundational strengths-based sessions for all employees. But for this continuous type of learning, Noam, tell me a little bit about your journey becoming a certified coach. I believe there's 15 others within PTC going through the same type of journey. How are you going to use that training for ongoing coaching and development?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's a great opportunity to become a strength coach. Personally, I think it's something that goes beyond the workplace, just in terms of my interactions with people around me, as well as just thinking around the philosophy of strength and understanding myself better. I think specifically at PTC, personally, I try to bring my knowledge of CliftonStrengths and my strength coach certification into everything I do. So if it's the different processes I have, if it's with my interaction with my colleagues or my employees. And then finally, part of what we're looking on in terms of leveraging the great coaches we have, and again, as you mentioned, we now will have 16 internal strengths coaches in PTC. We want to use that strength and that power to continue to spread the words and increase the understanding of CliftonStrengths across the organization. So it really starts with the onboarding. Right now, we added CliftonStrengths as part of our onboarding. In the US, it's something that we are doing actually before the employee joins. We already provide them with the opportunity to take the CliftonStrengths assessment. And as part of their first week, we assign one of our internal coaches to reach out and meet with them and really help them understand their report, setting them up for success, both personally in terms of them understanding where they can focus, but also in terms of their interaction with their team members and with their managers. So setting it up for success in the first days in which they join the organization. And then moving forward, we are looking at additional ways of how can we really leverage this power in ongoing assimilation of CliftonStrengths and the Gallup philosophy within PTC.
That's amazing. And Martin, when we think about that strengths-based engagement focus and performance-oriented type of learning path for leaders, you also went through the Boss to Coach journey, really kind of following through that journey that we outlined within that It's the Manager book. Tell me a little bit about your experience with the Boss to Coach journey.
Yeah, so I think that this notion that our roles continue to evolve, right? And we kind of suspect that the tools that we have, the tools around engagement, what I would say that what I appreciate from the Q12 and as well from the Boss to Coach journey is that there are structured conversations we know we need to have. We kind of just intuitively know it. We're not always exactly sure which ones to have. When you do the Q12, it highlights the areas that you should focus on. And I think the methodology going through Boss to Coach, there's just a nice pulse reminders. I think of them as reminders. They're some of what we're focusing on, we kind of know, but the way it kind of lays it out in kind of a nice cadence and rhythm, I think is really helpful.
That's fantastic. And when we kind of jump into more of that evidence piece now of last year, you really rolled out a significant learning program for all your employees during a really challenging time, during COVID, during a pandemic. Let's maybe take a deep dive into what are some of the outcomes that you're seeing there at PTC. What are some of the behavior changes that you're seeing, even some of the engagement scores that we're monitoring during last year's disruption? Let's go into that piece if you don't mind.
Yeah, so Jim, if you could pull up the slides. So here's another PTC story that highlights our partnership with Gallup. So if you rewind the tape, the end of February 2020, we knew that there was a pandemic. We knew things were happening in China. We knew things that were happening in Europe. They were happening in Washington. March is when things really started hitting home for us in the New York, New Jersey area. Remember, we were getting disproportionately crushed with COVID-19 about that time. So March, we pretty much shut down our facilities other than putting in a handful of people working in our labs. And I remember, Keb, talking to you and Mike McDonald, and it really was, hey, we've got some research we want to share with you. There's this concept of, engagement during moments of disruption. And what I remember most and what really resonated with me is that there was a lot of doom and gloom, and people were not sure what was going to happen. And you all had the audacity to call me and say, we've got research that can help you thrive in a pandemic. Wait a second. Thrive in a pandemic? If we just survive, thrive. So March, things get hit in the Northeast. April, we started the internal conversation. June, we did the first pulse survey. And then this was focusing on 4 of the 12 Q12 questions. And we had a 12-week process. Again, as I mentioned before, the questions you all provided, we knew what the questions, we knew areas we needed to focus on, knowing what's expected, having the right resources, being able to be your best every day. Do you see your purpose? And we did our second pulse survey in November, December. All 4 questions increased twice during a pandemic while we grew 9% in 6 months. That's crazy. If you click again, Jim, here are some of the stats. And one of the ones that we're really, really proud of, and Mike McDonald is the one who kind of really pointed this out. If you look at mission and purpose, and Keb set this up, this is a mission and purpose driven company. 80% of our employees in the second pulse survey in November, December of last year, 80% gave that a 5, right? And you can see that the change, which is about 2/3 across in the table, right? Everything went up. Now, what you don't see is that everything went up in the current means from the previous Q12, right? So we went up, had an intervention, went up again. Now, what I would offer to you is 2020 was a very good business year at PTC. And a lot of things were done to help us through the pandemic. But you guys delivered on that opening statement in April of 2020. How do you thrive during a pandemic? And and this is our evidence that you can do that if you focus on the right things, you structure the right conversations, and I think that it actually has set us up to really think about this new well-being at work concept and broader concepts. I'm glad you guys called us, Keb. I'm glad you guys called us, really.
That's fantastic. And when we think about these four elements and you measuring that during the time of disruption, our research shows, and Mike does a great job of illustrating this, but we know that if we can get through a disruption during tough times using those four elements of engagement, on the back end of that, we're going to turn out a lot positive. And again, you've done really best practices in terms of measuring engagement during times when there's a lot of hesitancy, there's a lot of concern, and there's a lot of uncertainty within organizations. If we have those conversations, I think that's really important. Let's focus a bit more on those four elements, Martin and Noam. Tell me a little bit about maybe some of the conversations that were had with managers around that, some of the feedback that they were receiving, and how they were driving those four elements forward, because you can see firsthand those were improved dramatically throughout the year. So how was that driven, I guess, locally by those managers?
Do you want me to go first, Noam?
Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, so let me start, and maybe Noam, you can jump in here as well. So the pandemic here. So here's a phrase I've used many times. We're a company that cares deeply about patients, and as it turns out, if you can care about a patient, you can care about your own employees and families. And during a pandemic, some of your employees and family members become patients, right? Not for our treatments, but for COVID-related treatment. And what I say is the companies that went into the pandemic, they cared about their employees and their families, were challenged to care more in new ways. And we went into the pandemic focusing on an employee as this is a broad sense. We come out of it focused on the whole person. And I think part of what the genius of those questions in this process was, and I'll give you full credit that you knew all this when you made the recommendation in April, is that it's structured conversations that open up dialogue that we never had. So if you want your opportunity to be your best at work, and you're a working parent, maybe a working mom with a young child, if you open up the dialogue that says, what do you need to be successful? What do you need to be? Your child is not in school because of a pandemic. What do you need to be successful? You need the morning off? Fine. We'll flex schedules. That's fine. We want you to be successful. We want your family to be okay. We want you to be okay, right? When you think about the resources, right? One of the things we realized was we stopped just asking, do you have the resources? We actually started asking people, describe what your resources are. Well, I'm sitting at the end of a coffee table with my laptop on a bunch of books. Well, we told you we'd buy you a monitor, we'd buy you this. I don't have a desk. We'll get you a desk, right? You need a desk? We'll get you a desk. We'll send you something from Amazon, right? It opened up this mission and purpose. If you can remember, this is a company that went 16 and a half years before it had its first approval. This is a company that knows how to weather some tough storms, right? But what these four questions allowed us to do is to start focusing on the larger issue of the whole person, and opening up dialogue that probably always existed, always needed to be opened up in a structured sort of way, in a way to where we're still small enough that all of this makes it back up to all the right people, to where you said, you need this, we can help you with this, right? We're going to help you get through this, because we know if we invest in our employees, ultimately they're going to be able to do their best. And when they're at their best, our patients ultimately benefit from that. So it had, that work last year has set us up for bigger and more complex conversations, which all companies should be having today. Noam, jump in here.
Yeah,
Anything you'd like to add?
I think, first of all, it's just, it was an incredibly powerful message, just in terms of the fact that even during a pandemic, we are still focusing on development. We're still focusing on engagement, where many other organizations weren't. And I think it was a great retention tool, and also help people feel that they're being taken care of. And I think that was done incredibly well. And I think it was done incredibly well by senior leadership, but that was not enough. You also had to have the more junior leaders, the mid-level managers, do a lot of the work there. And I think setting them up for success was a lot of the courses we did, both with Gallup and outside of Gallup, in terms of helping them have the conversations, have the interactions with their employees, and also, by the way, strengthening the community of managers and leaders within the organizations. I think having those different sessions allowed for managers to interact and connect and learn from each other and use each other as resources to better realize how they can work better together. So I think in that sense, people were really excited about the different questions and about the different sessions we provided. Not everybody did. There's always a variety, but I think overall, people were really excited, and we heard it both from managers as well as from the employees, who to this day are telling us how they had this great conversation with their manager about their strengths or about how they realized that they're missing something, so they were able to get them what they needed. So I think it's connecting back to the to our theme of the moments or the stories at PTC. It kind of adds into that element of how do we create the story, how do we create the people value proposition of who we are and what we stand for.
That's fantastic. Noam, thanks so much for that. And I don't know if I could have said that any better by both of you. That's really great. And for the audience as well, do what I do best every day is question number 3, and that was part of these 4 elements that we measured throughout the year. And I think that's really where the exciting or the enthusiasm can really take place is when we deliver on the strengths-based approach. A remarkable statistic is 1 in every 33 million people have the same top 5 strengths in order. So if you think about during the times of disruption or when we're working from home, how can we give the managers the ability to put their employees in the position to do what I do best? And that's really, I think, a lot of where the strengths-based development can come through, as well as from a remote setting as well. As so many times I heard throughout 2020, managers are really having a challenging time to connect with their employees. How do you have a meaningful conversation remotely when there is so much uncertainty in the workplace? And I think that's really where strengths can have a strong impact. And I think firsthand, Martin and Noam, we see that directly from your engagement improvements through using those 4 elements of engagement. Hey,
Kev.
Yeah,
Kev,
go ahead, Martin.
Let me just add one not so obvious benefits from that third question, right? So it's bad enough that 2020 was a pandemic, but in the United States as well, we had a civil rights moment. And because we were in the midst of these 12 questions when George Floyd was killed, we were prepared to engage in a dialogue with employees within our workforce who said, listen, I can't be my best at work when this is happening in my life. And we heard it, we responded in a really, really powerful way. But again, the power of that question and the power of being open to the responses. And if your focus is really trying to support all of your employees with whatever unique situations they have and unique needs, you hear that and you respond in a really, really powerful way. So it's not obvious that a response to a civil rights moment can be tied to Q3, but that's exactly what happened here as well. So I just want to highlight that for your listeners as well.
That's great. Thank you, Martin. And, if we consider what's next, you dropped a little bit of the Wellbeing at Work book that you recently unpacked. Tell me a little bit about your reaction to that book as we start winding down here.
Yeah, so when you think about well-being at work, for those that haven't read it, it starts with career well-being, right? And this notion that when things aren't right with your career, it's hard for everything else to kind of fall together. talks about physical well-being. That kind of goes back to yesteryear's wellness programs. Our personal fitness is important. Our mental health is important. Financial fitness, we've known that one of the big stressors in people's lives. So we've done some of the work. Community work. So part of what we've started is a global outreach team. When you're one of the ways it's, I've heard people say that one of the antidotes to getting through this pandemic is to be grateful. One of the ways you can be grateful is by helping those in need. And if your core competence is focusing on unmet medical needs, you can drop the unmet medical needs and put in whatever. Unmet hunger, unmet, we've started that community in as well. Social, wellness. And so we've started building, and I think as well, what we recognize is some of this we were already doing. And so when you think about the amazing work that Noam is doing and leading here, it really focuses on career well-being. I mean, when there are 135 people, you don't focus a whole lot on careers. You just got a big, long list of things to do, and you wear a lot of different hats to get them done. We're not that company anymore. And we need, the leadership and the great skill of Noam and the partnership with you all to start, developing people so that that base, that career well-being base, is set. So again, I think part of the power, and to the listeners, just read one book every 2 years, you're going to be fine. And it's there, and all of a sudden you realize we're already doing some of this, but we didn't really talk about it that way, and that's part of the power of the research that you all do.
That's fantastic. And Noam, I know we talked a little bit more about the Train the Trainer program that you're going through and 16 internal coaches. Pretty soon you'll be going through our CliftonStrengths Discovery Train the Trainer program, where we'll actually train you to facilitate a lot of our half-day sessions there internally. How do you plan on using those sessions as we start winding down today?
Yeah, just in terms of what we're planning for the future, considering CliftonStrengths, I already mentioned that we added it into the onboarding. But I think the next step is seeing how we can continue to integrate the Gallup language and practices into our culture, into all of our different practices and processes. Right now, a lot of it is focused on the onboarding, but what we're really looking at is how can we do more moving forward, if it's with organic teams or if it's with teams in different stage of development. Another thing that we're looking at is how can we become more data oriented? So in terms of talent management in general, how can we look at all the data points and really see how the different things that we do actually impact the organization? So becoming more data oriented, connecting the data and analytics, and really being more qualitative in our nature. So those are some of the things that we are looking at in terms of our future and the work we're doing with CliftonStrengths.
That's great. Jim, I know I jumped in a lot of questions there. Any questions from you or maybe from the audience?
Yeah, a couple from the chat room come in, and Lisa had asked, and Noah, maybe I'll throw this over to you. What are the roles for your 16 coaches play? How do they balance coaching with their other work? Are they full-time? That's a great question, Lisa. So how are you guys handling those other 16?
Yeah, so right now, all of the other 15, we are all talent management or part of the HR organization. So definitely not their only role, and they have a lot on their plates. Right now, we are really focusing on, it's part of the onboarding process. So when a new hire comes, we match them with a coach. Moving forward, we might expand that. So as Kev mentioned, we have our Train the Trainer, so they're also going to facilitate some sessions, but also maybe not just for new hires, maybe for people who are in their career for a long time, the opportunity to meet with a coach and talk about their strengths and really think through how they can focus on their strength in order to achieve their professional and personal development and goals. So that's what we're looking at in that sense.
I mean, there's a lot of organizations that wouldn't commit to that many. That's a lot for your size, but it's a bench, right? It's bench strength. You can always you can always go to it. Nate had asked a question, and Martin, I'll throw this one to you. Well, hold on. Let me ask this one first. What challenges did you have, and how did you overcome those? So if you were thinking about challenges during this time, you probably alluded to a few of them, but can you highlight a big challenge, and how'd you get through that?
So with engagement or strengths, or can I choose
whatever you want?
So I think that a small company, I believe, lives in dialogue. I used to say in my early years here at PTC, when we were very small, everybody was working on what was important, but very little of it was written down. Right? It's a high dialogue company. You can do things really fast and really accurate if you take out the typing and writing, right? I mean, it's just, and that's the epitome of the water cooler conversation. The challenge we had was you can't be in a water cooler when you've got 24 people scattered in Europe and another half dozen or 24 in Latin America, right? So how are you going to replicate in a way this desire to keep your finger on the pulse, know what's going on in a very, very tough organization? Remember, when it comes to small molecule development, only about 5 to 8% of all development candidates ever get approved. So this is a business where 90+% of the time you're failing. It's, I say it's only a real failure if you don't learn something, keep moving on. So, our challenge was, how do we capture that? But I think the beauty of the Q12 is that it's a survey process that is only completed with the conversation after you have the results. So voila, the dialogue pops out in the right areas, and we can see where the hot spots are, and we can jump in. This is a business where you try to jump on a little problem, not a big problem. So and I think that was the great strength. And our first Gallup survey, we had less than 400 people. We have about 1,200 now. So we needed it then. We need it even more now.
I hadn't really thought through that failure. You fail a lot in what you're doing, right? It's expected. Because you're going to try something that's not going to work, and you're going to do that 100 times until you find the one thing that does work. I think in a lot of organizations that any failure is seen as negative, and yet you live in that all the time. So that unique world of constantly trying, constantly experimenting. I think you'll have a good opportunity to experiment with people's strengths too. It's in the engagement pieces. 2 questions in one. Noam, I'll throw this to you. All 34 top 5 for new employees coming in. And then Lisa asks, have you adopted or looking at the CliftonStrengths for Manager report? Those 2 questions to you.
Yeah, so for the first one, yes, we are doing the full 34 for all new hires. So it's definitely something we are very proud at and working very hard with. In terms of incorporating the manager element, so first of all of our managers have the full 34 as well. We're also looking at eventually looking at, for example, 360, looking at the leadership competencies and how can we utilize those. Both for leaders and managers, but also in terms of part of the succession planning moving forward. So that's another element that we are looking at for next year.
Keb, any questions, anything left that you have to ask on this? We'll give the chat room one more shot at it, but anything as we think about bringing this in for landing, any other thoughts from your side or any questions you want to ask?
One last thing to add on to Noam's, all employees, I would say all employees now completed their all 34 strengths. So they have the full report at hand at all times. So I just wanted to add that in there.
No, Noam, how are folks managing? So they get this information, they've got it in a report, it's available through Gallup Access. Are you guys doing anything else with that as far as, nameplates or name tags or those kinds of things? Can you talk about some of those fundamentals of kind of keeping it front and center?
Yeah. So first of all, one thing that I know that we've been working on, and some have been using it just because they like it so much, is in the signature. So people have been adding it to their signature. Another thing that we've been doing, especially with all of us being on Zoom most of the time, is actually we created not an official, but it's been pretty widespread. Many people have been using their CliftonStrengths as well as our complementary assessment, which is the HBI. So we've been using both. So usually if I'm on Zoom, I have both of those on my side. And then when I interact with people, I can really see their strengths. They can see my strengths or my HBDI profile, and sort of figure out what's the way to best communicate with me and get the message across, or maybe why I'm taking so much time explaining about the history of things, kind of seeing that context there. So I think that's from a visual perspective. In addition to that, we've been offering different sessions, again, for both non-organic teams. So for now, it's mostly with Gala, but moving forward, we will have it also internally after the train the trainer. But also, we are doing sessions for organic teams, which I think from my perspective is really the next level. Because doing it for a non-organic team is great and people learn about themselves. If you bring it into an organic team, you really have the opportunity, first of all, to learn about your colleagues, some things that maybe you didn't know, and it helps you better understand some dynamics you might have, why this person is behaving in a certain way, where they're coming from. And then finally, looking at the team grids, that is a really powerful tool that we've been using to have a conversation both about how are we doing as a team, what might be some of our blind spots, and also when we interact with stakeholders, what do we need to take into account, especially if we can maybe look at the stakeholders and their team grids. That's a really powerful tool. So that's another thing that we've been doing with CliftonStrengths in the organization.
Martin, anything you want to add to that? And let me pile on this question from Mark a little bit earlier in the conversation. When you think about all these things that you're doing and they take time, like how do you justify that time away when they could be busy inventing things? That's in a lot of organizations, that's the tension. Like, man, all these conversations, these strengths things, the engagement stuff, it all takes time. So, Mark, let me throw that to you. How do you justify that time, the time spent on this away from inventing things?
Yeah, so we don't think it. Well, we obviously don't think of it that way. I mean, as Noam said before, the only thing we've gotten fussed at from the CEO of late is that we didn't have every new hire with their CliftonStrengths done before they came through the door. Right? Say that out loud. To go and tell your friends at Gallup, wow, I met some people that got in trouble because they had some people show up as new hires and they hadn't completed right. So it's like, well, we're like that. So. And why? Because understanding strengths is part of how we manage, is part of our dialogue. I mean, I moved into my role because there was a moment we realized we needed certain strengths in HR and talent management. We wanted to have a certain focus on culture and community, and voila, here I go into this new role, leveraging my strengths. That was the conversation. So it's not like something we do when we're not inventing, or doing drug discovery or commercializing drugs. It's how we do it, right? That if you believe in it, which we do, it's as important how you go about your work, how you collaborate, how you set up teams, how you understand each other, as it is what you're doing. And we really believe that it's always been the case, and it's a really, really powerful tool. I will add for your listeners' pleasure, you might expect in a biotech that goes through some of the challenges harmony is not one of the highest strengths in a biotech. If you ever needed any empirical evidence, I can share that with you. There are a lot of other strengths, but you got to be able to roll through some really, really tough whitewater rapids at times here. So
have you guys rolled it up? Do you know what the most common theme is?
I'll turn that to Noam as he's pulling up a spreadsheet real quick.
We did actually. I'm trying to I'm trying to bring it up. I remember Achiever is one of them. Learner is one of them.
Yeah.
I think there's a few more that are really the majority of our team.
Yeah.
I think those kind of match. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, you bet. And I know we mentioned a lot of onboarding and new hires. Where are the managers going to land in that process?
So the managers are expected to have a conversation start the conversation the first week. That's not going to be the full, the report and analysis, but it's this is important. This is how we manage. And then there's, I'll turn it over to you, Noam, for the rest of that. But it's part of what we're expected to do. It's part of what managers are expected to do.
Yeah. And I think there is an understanding and an appreciation from managers in terms of the development they are receiving. Again, both with the work we're doing with Gallup as well as the internal. We now have a learning and development senior manager, Cindy Lepora, who's doing a fantastic job in terms of setting up additional skills training, both for leaders and for employees. And they really appreciate it, and I think it really allows them to work well with their employees. So in terms of the onboarding process, again, they'll have a bit of an interaction just when the employee joins, and then later on a more in-depth conversation, sharing their report, looking at the report of the employee, but also then looking at how the employee fits into the team grid and what are the strengths that employee can bring into the team, and how can they leverage that to make him or her successful and the team more successful.
Well, this has been a packed full. Like if you're listening to this and this is your first time, you probably need to go back and listen to it again. There has been so much great information, and thank you to Noam and Martin. Thanks for doing that. Kev, why don't you take a second? Would you thank them for coming as well, and then we'll wrap this up.
Absolutely. Noam, Martin, we talk a lot, and again, we value your partnership. We really appreciate it, and this is really designed to recognize the great work that you do at PTC Therapeutics, as well as your continued partnership with Gallup, and we greatly appreciate that moving forward. So thanks again for taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and Kev, thanks to you and Mike for the great partnership over the years.
Absolutely, thank you, everybody.
The great Mike McDonald. He shows up in a lot of these things without even having to be here. So with that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we do have available now in Gallup Access. And so we keep adding to those every day. Head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. While you're there, at the very bottom of the page, you can sign up for the CliftonStrengths Insight newsletter. That'll come out once a month. A great way to kind of stay up to date on everything that's happening. If you're interested in coaching, master coaching, or you want to engage with us with Gallup in some way, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. We'll get right back to you. And if you want to follow the webcasts, if you're like, oh man, this is great, I want more of this, we have tons of this material available for you. Head out to gallup.eventbrite.com. If you want to catch the recorded version, they're all on our webpage at gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. We want to thank you for joining us today. If you joined us live, thanks for being out there. Some great questions from the chat room. If you're listening to the recorded version, we probably have another one of these for you ready right after it. Just hit play and it will go for you. Thanks for coming out today. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.